This is NatSec Matters.
I'm host Michael Allen with Beacon Global Strategies. Today I'm joined by David Albright, the president and founder of the Institute for Science and International Security. Mr. Albright directs the project work of the Institute and has published numerous assessments on nuclear weapons programs throughout the world. Mr. Albright joins us today for a discussion on the status of Iran's nuclear program in the aftermath of the June 2025 attacks and the outlook for the region. Stay with us as we speak with Mr. David Albright. David Albright, thank you so much for joining NatSec Matters.
Oh, no, thank you for inviting me.
Well, David, you are one of the world's renowned experts on the Iranian nuclear program. I have read your work and consulted your writings for many, many years, going back to when I was in the White House at the National Security Council. So we are really honored to have you on the podcast today. And I think an appropriate interval of time has passed since the U.S. and Israeli bombings of the Iranian nuclear program. And I think it's in order for just a status report to see where things stand. And you, of course, have published a lot on this, and we follow you on X as well. But I wonder, now that we've had some strategic distance, are you in a position to give us more of a definitive view on the success of the Israeli and the U.S. bombing on all of these different nuclear facilities?
We're still looking at the Institute. We're looking at satellite imagery, reading reports, and so we're not completely finished. But one of the things that is clear, and it's been made even clearer by continuing to find sites destroyed by Israel, that they had an intensely deep knowledge of the entire sensitive nuclear program in Iran. I mean, and I use the term sensitive, it's the part that was enriching uranium, the parts that were going to be able to make, or were dedicated to making the bomb components if Iran had made a decision to make the bomb. And also incredible deep knowledge of the people involved in it. And what we've seen through satellite imagery particularly is just a systematic destruction of one facility after another. And where it's hard for us, for example, you take some of the enrichment sites that are underground, it's hard for us to assess, how destroyed they were. I mean, obliterated is not a word I would use, but still we see evidence that they have not Iran has not invested the resources to go back in to do much of anything at some of these sites, the underground sites. We also see that they've taken actions to protect above ground assets and try to disperse them, and they're critical assets related to ventilation. And so they clearly are not operating that facility and actually trying to reduce the chance that more of it's destroyed. So I think you have from our point of view at ISIS, that we think that the centrifuge program was essentially destroyed. And the centrifuge program was very large. I mean, it was a large-scale program involving, at the time, about 22,000 centrifuges that were installed, lots of enriched uranium, and lots of other facilities associated with making the centrifuges or making the materials that are fed into the enrichment plant. And those facilities were largely destroyed. And the ones on the above ground you can see were obliterated. And so I think the enrichment program, as Iran knew it, no longer exists. Doesn't mean there's not some dangerous remnants, which I'll talk about a little later, but in terms of the ability to enrich uranium, I think, and even the Iranians say they're not enriching uranium now. On the weaponization side, it's a little harder to assess, but again, you see a systematic destruction of the facilities associated with the nuclear weaponization program, as we would call it, and a very unusual tactic of killing this key scientists in the program, that they knew who was leading it, and they went out to systematically kill as many as they could and terrify the rest. So I think Israel dramatically set back this program.
Yeah. All right. We're going to get to each of these issues as we go forward. Let's review. I think in the unless you read ISIS a lot, your publications, I think you thought generally in Washington that Natanz and Fordow were the major centrifuge facilities of the Iranians. But there was a third at Esfahan, am I right? And
Yes.
okay, and if you could go site by site and just sort of give us an overview, you said essentially destroyed program, but are there differences between the three sites?
Yeah, let me start with Esfahan, and a major portion of Esfahan was to make the material that would be fed into the gas centrifuge. Takes natural uranium and turns it into uranium hexafluoride, and then that uranium hexafluoride was sent to Natanz, and that's enriched there. And Natanz is the workhorse of the enrichment program. It's where most of the centrifuges were located. It's in two parts: an underground facility, fuel enrichment plant, as they call it, and then a pilot plant above ground. And Fordow was a parallel program. It was actually Fordow was originally created during the Ahmad plan in the early 2000s as the facility Iran was going to use to make weapon grade uranium under that crash nuclear weapons program. That program stopped, or they stopped it, and then but Fordow construction continued, and then eventually it was discovered by Western intelligence, and Iran put it under safeguards. In the last couple of years, Iran has taken Fordow and used it principally to further enrich the uranium produced at Natanz. And so it takes, let's say, 5% and runs it up to 20. And now in the months before the attack, it was running 20% up to 60%, which is very close to weapon grade uranium. And so these plants, in a sense, were operating in tandem, Natanz and Fordow. Now, Esfahan had other facilities, one of which was facilities to make uranium metal. And one of the ones that Israel bombed was the facility to take enriched uranium hexafluoride and start the process of turning it back into metal. And so it was seen as part of the weaponization side of things. And so that facility was bombed. Also, it turned out that in secret, again, Iran was building a third enrichment plant. And we think that that's in a tunnel complex it's part of the main nuclear Esfahan site, off to the side of the main above ground facilities. We don't think it's operated. We don't think centrifuges were put in. And Iran admitted to having it kind of in anger over some actions by the International Atomic Energy Agency just a few days before the bombing started.
Right. So let's talk a little bit about how the centrifuge program was destroyed. As I understand it, at least at Fordow, the bomb went into the ventilation shaft, and it's the shock waves that reverberated downward and wrecked the sort of cascade. Is that the right way to think about it?
I think we're not fully sure. I mean, we knew the ventilation shaft. We knew one ventilation shaft existed, and we thought that would be the weak point. We have from the documents that Israel absconded from Tehran in 2018, and we were given a significant part of those documents as part of our research. We had the drawings for the Fordow plant as envisioned in 2003 and 2004, and you can clearly see there's a ventilation shaft that runs right from the surface straight down to one end of the enrichment plant underground, so it goes all the way down. And so we don't know finally what was built. Iran modified the plans and built a second ventilation shaft that goes down to, in a sense, another end of the centrifuge plant. And so we think by these sending, I guess, 6 bunker busters down these shafts, that they would have crashed through barriers and delivered quite a shock wave, plus into the plant, and they would have basically met sort of in the middle and probably caused immense destruction.
Mm. And is it, I know it sounds hard to differentiate between the damage at each of the 3 sites, but if you had to shorthand it, and we won't hold you to it, I mean, is there one that was particularly more devastated than the others?
I think they were all pretty devastated. I mean, except the Esfahan tunnel complex.
Yeah.
We should talk about that because I think Fordow was pretty seriously damaged. When we looked at a lot of satellite imagery in the days after the attack, and also in since then, you just don't see them trying to go in. I mean,
Yeah.
there was some work, but it's largely a docile or a dormant site. And Natanz, where the two bunker busters went into the main centrifuge hall at Natanz, it's hard for us to judge. It's a fairly large area underground, has multiple stories, and so it's hard to judge. The IA thinks that certainly, I think there's agreement. None of those centrifuges are operational.
Yeah.
I mean, it's severe damage, but the extent of the damage is harder to predict, and it's much easier to recover operations again in Natanz than in Fordow. And so,
Yeah.
but one of the things that happened recently in the last month was they started moving parts of the ventilation system, the chillers. There were two facilities with chillers that are used for ventilation underground, and they started moving them and dispersing them all around the Natanz site. And without those, the plant can't operate. So I think
Hmm.
to us that was a signal that this plant really is out of operation. There's no plans to restart it anytime soon, and they're just protecting residual assets. And why chillers would be in that category, it may just be they're relatively, expensive, and why not save the assets if you can move them? And they clearly are a target in other sites that Israel attacked. Go after the ventilation system and try to knock that out. And I should add too, in Isfahan, you can just see what's destroyed. I mean, we watched it every day in satellite imagery, and you can see Israel attacked it twice. And you could see the bombing. When the U.S. attacked it, it was just devastating. I mean, these whatever 23 or so cruise missiles cause much greater damage than what Israel could do per strike, and then they blocked the tunnel entrances with the cruise missiles. The three tunnel entrances were severely damaged by cruise missiles.
Yeah, I think I've forgotten. I remember being struck at the time by why they used cruise missiles at that site. And do you remember why? What was the reason?
I think Isfahan did not have ventilation shafts like Fordow. I mean, I think it's probably a little smaller. It may not be quite as deeply buried. It was built a long time ago. It was built in 2004 or five. It was declared to the International Atomic Energy Agency. They've been inside it.
Yeah.
And Iran always said, if we fear a strike, we're going to move enriched uranium into these facilities. I think without anyone noticing, they decided to also build an enrichment plant inside that tunnel complex. At least that's what we're assessing. We haven't confirmed that yet. Um, but it had a different structure, and the ventilation system everything seems to come in from the tunnel entrances. And those were destroyed, there's only a few. We can identify a few weak spots, but they don't. It doesn't appear that they're directly over the internal facility. But if someone was going to bomb it again, I guess the certain types of ventilation shafts could be attacked. And just if I can add, we don't know why they use Tomahawk cruise missiles. I mean, for us, we wish they'd maybe use some harder ordnance on the underground site from just a military point of view. So I'm not quite sure why they chose that. And we're wondering if they did something to create a shockwave from the tunnel entrance somehow into the facility itself that then caused additional damage. I mean, the sites tend to be designed to prevent that, but two, three Tomahawk cruise missiles coming in through the front door may cause considerable damage inside.
Yeah. I knew they must have a really good reason, and that's as good reason as any. Also from the aftermath of the strike, especially among those who I think were critical of it, they talked about the so-called missing HEU. And we've seen a little bit about this in the newspapers and the IAEA report, but could you sort of remind us what that was all about and then bring us up to date on where we think it's buried?
Yeah, and I think in our assessment, I mean, we think this program is essentially destroyed, but there's important remnants of it. And one of the remnants is the enriched uranium. It's the 60% enriched uranium. It's about 540 kilograms. There's 20% enriched uranium, almost 200 kilograms, and then there's around 5%, several tons of that. And so it's a lot of enriched uranium. And one of the criticisms of Israel was, why didn't you target that material? Why didn't you do something? You're masters at destroying things or disrupting things, stealing things. Why didn't you deal with that? And And I think it's led to a lot of questions. And even during the war, it was like, where is particularly the 60%, which is 99% of the way to weapon grade uranium and can be used directly in a nuclear weapon if you were determined enough. And so where is it? And Iran had said we're told the IA we're going to move it if we're attacked. The IA then said you can't move it. And it appears that Iran did not move it out of the nuclear sites. So
Mm,
it's principally at Esfahan, um, under in buried under rubble. It's in the tunnel complex. There's material in Fordow and material and a lot of low enriched uranium. This up to 5% enriched uranium at Natanz.
mm,
And so the current assessment, and Israel just leaked a story over the weekend in the Jerusalem Post, that they know where it all is and they're
mm.
watching. So who knows? But they're usually credible. But it seems to be at the nuclear sites. Iran has said it's under the rubble, but but you can't take that too seriously because if you wanted to have a good diversion scenario, say it's all under the rubble and non-recoverable, and yet you have 200 kilograms of 60% off in a warehouse someplace or a vault somewhere. So
Right.
there is an ongoing concern, and it is dangerous. There's also we don't know how many centrifuges Iran made and didn't deploy,
Yeah.
and so is it 50? Is it 2,000? Is it 3,000? And so there is in the immediate during the war, particularly, there was this worry that Iran would create a new centrifuge plant somewhere else with its 1 or 2,000 centrifuges and enrich the 60% in a kind of a crash scenario. And most assess that hasn't taken place, but it's added urgency to know where is this 60%. And also a drive among some to how many centrifuges do they have that remain undestroyed?
So I'm going to get in a little bit to the what would be observable in the future if the Israelis or the United States wanted to go back in. But just on the HEU, I mean, of course, the Israelis would have targeted the HEU, or they would have assumed it was buried within existing targets, wouldn't they?
Yeah, I think so, but we don't. They're not talking, and
Yeah.
and 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 the problem in the public debate was the Iranian statement from a senior official says, in a bombing, we're moving it, and the nuclear sites were not targeted on the first night. They
Mm.
and so I forget if it was the second or third night that places like Esfahan were hit. So Iran had this window of opportunity to move things, and the 60% is in canisters. They're protected. They're heavy canisters, relatively speaking, so they can withstand traffic accidents. But they weigh about 100 pounds each, and they each have about, I forget, 25 kilograms of 60% enriched uranium. And so, two people can easily carry one of these canisters. And so, in theory, they could move them pretty rapidly if they wanted to. And we think that we just don't know. Now, President Trump, I think, came out. I think it was him. He said, and maybe others said, Iran viewed Fordow as indestructible, and so they moved a lot of assets into Fordow, not knowing the U.S. could destroy it. So it is a big mystery, and it's one of the reasons the IA is insisting on and keeps pushing to get access to the enriched uranium, is so that we can know exactly where it is. Iran is playing hard to get,
Yeah.
and in that sense, we're dependent on the intelligence community to monitor it and try to have faith that they know and they're doing a good job watching.
But it's fair to say that it was either destroyed, diverted, or is buried.
Yeah, I think so. And one of the things we were looking for canisters in the rubble of the above ground sites, and because we know where some of it was. I mean, we know exactly where even in parts of the buildings it was located, and we couldn't see any. But with rubble, and these are small, but in this sense, we do believe the Iranians that there's a significant amount, if not all of it, either under the rubble of destroyed facilities above ground or in Esfahan Tunnel, Natanz, and Fordo.
Got it. All right. Before we go to weaponization, let me just close this off. So the IAEA is dealing again with the Iranians. Doesn't seem like the Iranians have a lot of cards to play. They're clearly playing this HEU to some degree, but tell us where we are with the IAEA, its most recent report, and its role in seemingly forestalling the reimposition of sanctions under the snapback mechanism.
Yeah, I think the IA, I think, would like to forestall snapback because they fear further reactions from Iran, but they don't have much to offer the Europeans, and so the IA has made very clear everything in Iran still is covered by the Non-Proliferation Treaty and therefore has to be safeguarded. It doesn't matter if it's in a destroyed facility or not. I mean, and the IA has told Iran, well, maybe you don't want to go in there and feel you can't, but we have ways to interrogate what's inside destroyed tunnels or under destroyed buildings. And so, but Iran is really just trying to leverage its limited leverage or limited assets in a sense, its HEU, to try to forestall things like snapback. Or further military strikes. So I'm not optimistic that the IA is going to get its hands or be able to inspect this HEU anytime soon, unless the Europeans decide not to snap back. But just inspecting this material is not enough to get the Europeans not to snap back. And so I would imagine that we may not know from the IA where this material is for a considerable amount of time. I mean, that's
Yeah.
guaranteed by any means, and I hope it's not true. But every time I negotiate something with Iran, and they did, the modalities of inspecting the material, they just negotiated. But that just is a modality. If Iran says you can inspect it, they'll have to do these 6 steps to get access to the material, for example. But as soon as they do that, then they say something, Iran says something else. But by the way, if there's snapback, we won't implement the modalities.
Uh,
So there's always threats and resistance from Iran.
but the stated objective of the IAEA is let inspectors back in, and we want access to this particular issue in particular.
And I think they'd like to see go to the places that were destroyed. I mean, Israel also destroyed 3 or 4 centrifuge manufacturing sites, all that
Right.
were known, and they were all declared under the nuclear deal. And we recently looked at one. It was Kalai Electric, it's called, and it was really thoroughly destroyed. There were 2 attacks and just complete destruction. The other centrifuge manufacturing sites were struck in the same way. But nonetheless, the IA would want to see these things and make sure there's no nuclear material and interrogate people there to the extent they can.
We're going to take a quick break, and we'll be right back with more of our discussion with David Albright.
Beacon Global Strategies is the premier national security advisory firm. Beacon works side by side with leading companies to help them understand national security policy, geopolitical risk, global technology policy, and federal procurement trends. Beacon's insight gives business leaders the decision advantage. Founded in 2013, Beacon develops and supports the execution of bespoke strategies to mitigate business risk, drive growth, and navigate a complex geopolitical environment. With a bipartisan team and decades of experience, Beacon provides a global perspective to help clients tackle their toughest challenges.
All right. So, I was about to ask you this question with regard to weaponization, but as you have surveyed all of the sites that were bombed, were there any that you said to yourself or your team at the Good ISIS said, wow, we didn't even know about these 3 or 4?
Yes, there were some. I mean,
Okay.
we knew they had to exist, but did not know they existed until we saw them being destroyed. Or IDF sometimes would put out a little blurred, reddish colored video of the sites they hit and kind of give general descriptors. But there were definitely places we did not know about and involved, particularly in making precursor chemicals or working on some of the components.
And remind me, did the Israelis hit any of the uranium mines or just the conversion
No,
and processing?
it
Did they
was
hit the
it's
processing?
They hit the processing to make uranium hexafluoride. The U.S. hit that.
Yeah, okay.
Israel didn't, and that was a big site. That's a big building, and a couple buildings at Esfahan. It's the core of the facility. It's why it was built originally, was to make the feed gas for the centrifuge, and the Tomahawks really destroyed that place. But they did not touch uranium mining. They did go after heavy water production. They took out a third. It's a linear process, and they took out a third of the heavy water production plant. They knocked out. They just decided to break through the core of the dome of the Iraq reactor that was under construction.
Yeah.
It was far from operational, but nonetheless, Iran was trying to finish it, and they hit you know, mostly, and they avoided Bushehr. They didn't hit any of the nuclear power reactor. They didn't hit the research reactors. One's operational in Tehran, one is being constructed at Esfahan.
And they did that because of concerns about radiation spread.
Yeah, and also, and I think they wanted to delineate between the sensitive parts and then the legitimate parts, in a sense, in Israel's mind. They don't mind if Iran produces nuclear electricity. The reactors come from Russia. Russians are always there. It's under good safeguards, and and Iran does not have any plutonium separation capabilities. They intended to build them 20 years ago, but they never did. And so the spent fuel coming out of the reactor that has quite a bit of plutonium is stored there and then eventually is sent back to Russia. And I think Israel can live with that.
Okay, so back to, well, let's start weaponization then. So we've just sort of covered the manufacturing, if you will, of fissile material, and then weaponization, of course, is fashioning it into an actual bomb. So you said earlier, clearly Israel had deep knowledge of the sites, and I want to get to scientists next, but tell us a little bit about the weaponization sites are just spread out and hard to find, right? They're not as much buried. Am I right?
That's right. And it's surprising what they knew. I mean, we knew some of the things have come out over time. I mean, because of the Ahmad plan documents that Israel will know, there were 20 sites associated with the Ahmad plan involved just in the weaponization, and and um, and many of them were repurposed or shut down, and then some of them were restarted recently, and Israel knew that, and
Mm-hmm.
we got some information from them on some of the sites. There was in the attacks by Israel about I guess about a year ago, a little more over a year ago, they were mostly targeting missile sites, but they also hit something at Parchin called Talagon 2.
Yeah.
And that site was involved in making, as far as we understand, plastic explosives, which are used in this innovative initiator that Iran has. It's actually a Soviet design that was passed to the Iranians, and it allows you to avoid using shaped charges, and you, in a sense, you initiated hundreds of points around the hemisphere, around the main charge. And it's very hard to do, and you need plastic explosives in these channels that are all over these shells, hemispheric shells, and so that the ignition points all ignite at the same time. You're using just the length of the channel as such to
Mm-hmm.
do the timing, and the plastic explosive has to be very pure. It's not what you get common military grade plastic explosive. And so you have to have equipment to make sure it's highly purified plastic explosives. And you know that. So you have to have good measuring equipment. And Israel just destroyed that building.
Yeah.
And so Iran may have cobbled together, reconstituted that capability or was reconstituting it. But nonetheless, it just showed how the detailed knowledge they had, or even a sort of a component in nuclear weapons component, a subcomponent, was targeted in a bombing really aimed at getting the missiles. So and then if you look at other components, they were targeting particular aspects of the nuclear weapon. And I mentioned the part to make the weapon grade uranium metal, um, and the um, and then there were neutron initiator work. And so it was quite amazing, actually,
Yeah.
what they knew and what they destroyed.
David, how do y'all get your information? Do you have contracts with commercial imagery companies or do governments share things?
Yeah, well, both. I mean, we have subscription services with the major commercial satellite imagery companies, and we appeal to governments for information. We try to get information. We have a hard time with the U.S. government. I mean, the U.S. government has a hard time deciding what's classified and not, and we don't deal in leaks. I mean, if like when we deal with a foreign government, it's Israel or European governments, I mean, it's a formal process. I mean, you want to have a meeting, they get approval, we meet. Those governments appear to have an easier job of deciding at a lower level because we're not dealing with the head. They have an easier job deciding what can be declassified and given to us.
Right,
And so we appeal on that level, and we've succeeded in often getting information that way. And then we use the media. I mean, they're great investigators, and
right.
use Iranian media. We spend a lot of time looking at what the Iranians discuss and say, their academic publications, looking at who's doing what, where they're working, university wise. We will
And the
focus.
IAEA is probably a
And the
source.
IA for the nuclear stuff, the IA is the best source. I mean,
Yeah.
it's remarkable what they've revealed on Iran's centrifuge and other nuclear capabilities and the amount of material. They used to publish exactly where the 60 and 20% was.
Yeah.
The how much is it at a building at Esfahan? And I think the Iranians said, please. I mean, this is a little bit over the top. And so they stopped. But
So the story goes that in 2003, the Iranians halted their nuclear weapons program, which at the time was called the Ahmad Plan. But if the Israelis in 2018 did a daring intelligence operation in which they were able to spirit out of a warehouse somewhere on the outskirts of Tehran. I don't know how an airplane full of documents that provided much more detail about their original weaponization program. And I remember Netanyahu gave a big press conference releasing it, but that must have been a big day for you, and maybe you've since learned a lot.
and we thrive on that. We do historical studies. We've looked at South Africa, Iraq pre-91. So I mean, we were in the history business too, and so yeah, it was fascinating. And it took months to negotiate with the Israeli government. It was the prime minister's office to get access to the documents. They were giving more to the media than us. In fact, we were getting our documents initially from the media because they had no clue what they were getting. I mean, they would
Yeah.
get 3, 4, 500 pages of documents. They could read maybe three, and so we were collecting from them. But it's a remarkable set, and I think in the U.S. reporting it was downplayed, but we found that there were many things that were not known to the
Really?
and we could only talk to the Israelis, but we met with the intelligence community, and I've been to the archive, and we tabulated all the facilities, and they didn't know about half of them.
Wow.
So, and they said, well, they can't speak for the U.S., but I would imagine if Israel didn't know about them, the U.S. may or may not, but probably didn't. And they were things like the places they were going to make weapon grade uranium metal, um, and fabricate it into components. Two facilities like that. One of which we all knew back in looking at it in 2004. There was a big push to understand some places at Parchin, and Solve the Tunnel Complex didn't have any idea that it had just been repurposed from being the production site to make weapon grade uranium cores. And the Israelis told me they didn't know that either. So there was a lot in there, and also that shaped Israel's ability to find out more, because there was the complete personnel list of everyone who worked in Ahmad with
Wow.
names, the father's names, the national ID, their degrees. And so sometimes it's hard to figure out who's who because you may not have all the names. But this was a complete personnel list. And so those people could be tracked. And many stayed in the successor organizations that followed Ahmad. And so you could see what they're doing, you could see who they were training, and so Israel had all this information
Amazing.
to what it already had.
Well, you're right. I remember the U.S. intelligence community sort of saying, "Yeah, we've seen all this before," or they didn't seem like it. They didn't act in the public sphere like they had learned anything new. But
Well, and it also it was frustrating. I mean, they couldn't talk about it. It was made secret, and so I'd have meetings at the National Security Council um, during first Trump administration, and I could talk about the documents, and they couldn't.
yeah,
And you really, when Netanyahu went forth, just a fraction of what was in the documents was really understood, and and it and Israel had provided it was the largest translation project they'd ever undertaken, and we did a lot of translation, and it's hard. I mean, you had two people have to translate. One is a technical expert, and one is really someone good at Farsi, and it's very labor intensive. And so I would imagine when Netanyahu went on, the U.S. had barely scratched the surface of the documents.
yeah. That's definitely the case. All right, let's talk about the scientist a little bit. So, of course, the Israelis have been after the scientists for years. There was
Right.
always fascinating New York Times articles about Israeli agents on motorcycles with magnet bombs driving up to an Iranian scientist at a red light, sticking the bomb onto his car, and it blows up and kills the scientist.
Right.
And then, of course, the father of the Iranian nuclear program, if you will, Fakhrizadeh, was also killed in a spectacular remote control machine gun attack. But I don't know. Sometimes I feel like I would hear experts say, you know what, these are spectacular and interesting to see, but it's not going to have any real material detriment to the program. And that's because they have plenty of scientists and they'll just all relearn, or they're all learning at the same time. What do you think the value is of killing scientists?
Well, I think I share your opinion. I mean, when we looked at the Ahmad documents, we could clearly see that the ones killed in this 2010, 2012 period, they were the leaders, some of the leaders of the Ahmad plan. So you had Fakhrizadeh. They tried to kill him in about 2008 and failed. Then they killed the second tier of several of the second tier. They missed some of them, um, and and these people had been training scientists. I mean, that was a key part of their plan was we know we don't know much. We need to learn it, and then we need to transfer that knowledge to younger people. And so they've been doing that. I think so. To me, it was hard to judge. I mean, Fakhrizadeh was unique. He was like the General Groves of the whole program. And so to us, it was a latent program after Ahmad, but
Mm-hmm.
program to prepare. So they were keeping their skills intact, maybe even making some advancements on various parts of weaponization. But he was this great engineer manager, and I think they were hurt by his death, but not in a critical way. And we know that they accelerated their program after he died. Even a couple of years later, at least in the last 2 years, they accelerated the program. So obviously they keeping their teams together and working on aspects of in a sense being able to make the bomb quicker. And so, yes, to me, it always struck me as a little odd to kill. They killed a guy who was involved in procurement, and we knew him from. I sometimes am an expert for federal prosecutions, and he was directing in his Iranian procurement company agent to work with a Chinese agent to get U.S. components for the centrifuge program, and I knew that they were communicating with him directly, and they killed him. Procurement person can be
Wow.
replaced pretty easily, but so there's a psychological warfare going on. They're trying to terrorize the Iranian scientists and engineers and managers. But again, you can argue it's probably not going to be effective. I think they realized that, and in this war, they designed to try to fix that problem by killing as many as they could.
Mm-hmm.
And so they killed nine, I forget, 9 or 11 top SP&D, the group that would build the weapon if they were so ordered. Um, and then they then did all kinds of texting and other social media content to a whole huge number of scientists and engineers to terrify them, saying, "We're going to
Yeah.
kill you next." And
Mm.
then they set up an informant program, just very blatantly. You just distributed literature all over Tehran and other parts of Iran, where if you have information, contact this email address.
Mm.
Use a VPN, but we're interested in your information. So they were trying to create even more informants. Iran lost knowledge and experience because of this effort. They now have to worry that the person next to them could rat them out to the Israelis for a reward. And
Yeah.
also, and so I think and I'm sure every wife is saying, "Oh my God,
Mm.
Jim, let me use a US name. Please don't go down this path of working for them because not only you'll get killed, I'll get killed and the children too." So, I
Right.
mean, it was a really brutal attack on the scientists where in the early days, in the magnetic bombs, those bombs would kill the driver, the scientist, and not touch the wife.
Wow.
And so, but this time they decided to kill the wife too and children in the next room. So,
Yeah.
they stepped it up, and I think it's going to be harder for Iran to build the bomb in the future because of you combine that with efforts to destroy more documentation. They found another set of the archive and destroyed that.
Oh, they did. Wow.
Yeah, and then they um, went after in destroying these sites. They were certainly trying to destroy equipment and documentation. So I think Iran has less knowledge and experience now than it did before the war. And we know, I mean, think of what was lost. I mean, this is kind of a stupid example, but think of, we can lose knowledge. What was lost when Rome fell,
Right.
in Constantinople, and then, took a
The
long
Library
time.
of Alexandria. Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. Trump says this is interesting and probably an impossible question. Trump says it's obliterated. You've said it's been a systematic destruction. Is there any way to estimate how many years this has set them back?
We can't. I mean, the Israelis talk about 2 years, and they refloated that over the weekend again and take them 2 years of hard work if they made a decision to do it. But they all have to worry that Israel will be there to try to stop it. And so they think it's very different. I mean, our assessment was before the war, they could have a bomb, non-deliverable by missiles, but a bomb within 6 months. Some thought even sooner. Have weapon-grade uranium in a matter of days because of the capability of Fordow using 60%. So in Israel's mind, they've really pushed them back quite a bit, but it's not over. And that's really where I was hoping Trump would follow up with negotiations. I mean, he said he wanted to end the enrichment program. He wanted good inspections. He's done nothing
Yeah.
since the war. And that's problematic because I think it is still a dangerous program.
Yeah. So critics, and we'll begin to wrap up here in a second, but critics have said, well, the Iranians had not made the final decision to pursue nuclear weaponization. But boy, after bombing them, you can guarantee they've made that strategic decision now. And while you may get a year or two out of this, they're going to go so far deep underground or things that we can't even begin to contemplate. There'll be a nuclear power in the future. What do you make of that?
Well, they haven't done it. I mean, they have not done it, and I think they're traumatized. I mean, I think they're seriously set back in their own thinking and their own capabilities. Um, I think that, which is also when, now is the time to really leverage or push Iran to make real concessions. I mean, they're very vulnerable, um, but you need a good deal, and that's what Trump advocated. We don't need another kind of Iran deal of 2015. I mean, you can't even have that now, but you want to, Trump said, let's end enrichment. Well, Israel just ended enrichment in Iran. They're not enriching. It's going to be very hard for them to enrich on any large scale anytime soon, for years probably. But they could enrich on a small scale to make weapon grade uranium. And so what we're pushed into is that we have to rely on the intelligence community to detect that. And it probably will be fairly slow moving, but to detect it and then stop it. And if they go deeper, you can stop them by blowing up the entrances, trying to destroy whatever ventilation systems they have, what other vulnerabilities they have in the mountain. Um, but it would be military options essentially, and depending on the intelligence community, particularly Israel, to detect it. They claim they can, and I think that's. But I think it's why I personally think this isn't over, and wait a year or two, and then see what Iran does, and that Israelis may miss it. I mean, they're not invincible, as we know from October 7th.
Yeah.
We also know they missed a lot of what was in the Ahmad plan. They knew a
Yeah.
lot, but they didn't know everything. And
Didn't
so,
know everything.
so it is some, in a way, I'm answering this in a long way, but I think we're in a pretty good position now. I think Iran is too scared in a sense. I think it also, I don't think it wants to move its enriched uranium now. I mean, if it is in the Esfahan mountain, they feel that that one really is hard for the United States and Israel to destroy.
Yeah.
And so if they move it, Israel still may have all kinds of drones in the sky.
Yeah.
I mean, that was their principal way of knowing what's going on. It wasn't with satellites or jets; it was with drones, and
Really.
and so Iran may feel that leaving the enriched uranium on the nuclear sites is their safest bet in the short to medium term. And but at some point, their air defense systems will get good enough that maybe they can have more confidence they can clear the skies of Israeli drones, and then they may try something again.
So every time I hear about the Israeli drones, I assume that the Israelis have just some amazing real estate inside of Iran
Yeah.
where they're able to launch these, who knows how, out of the roof of a, retractable roof in some warehouse or something. But it really is remarkable.
Yeah, they've recruited a lot of people, and also Israel also tested this idea: can you overthrow the regime? So they deliberately attacked, the police, the Bazi, the various repressive forces, and I saw a list of two or three types of repressive forces in Tehran, and they went after the people, killed them, and it had zero impact. I mean, I think
Yeah.
what we saw in the media, they attacked even prison, thinking the prisoners would run out and escape, and in the end, it just got a bunch more killed. And
Yeah.
but the Iranian people didn't rise up; they didn't start protests. I mean, they're very unhappy. But but I think Israel learned you can't bomb them and think that's going to lead to regime change. Um, and I think ultimately in the Israeli mind, that's the only thing that'll change the risk calculation is
Yeah.
regime change. And then you have to evaluate the next regime to see if you're really clear.
Yeah. And Trump seemed to put the brakes on some of the targeting of the supreme leader and
Yeah.
others. So,
Yeah.
well,
Yeah. And yeah, maybe they could have gone further. I mean, Israel has said that if they detect Iran moving toward a bomb again, they will take out the leadership. That they'll go after the sites or whatever they can, but they will take out the leadership of Iran if in the next round.
last question. So, as you survey the landscape over there and do your work, did the Israelis miss anything? Do we know of anything that they missed?
Well, I think for me, the frustration is they missed enriched uranium. I mean, I had discussions in Israel or with Israelis 2 years ago when there was a lot of public brouhaha. They need 2 years to prepare to attack Iran, and and that was certainly one of the discussion is how are you going to take out the enriched uranium? And there
Yeah.
were some preliminary discussions, and maybe they did it. There's ways to poison the enriched uranium, where if you go then to enrich it, it'll destroy your centrifuge.
Mm.
And we know that just because we know the danger of impurities in uranium hexafluoride can really cause immense problems. If you don't clean up the uranium hexafluoride as it's being produced, and then even before it goes into the centrifuge, there's a cleaning step. Um, you can crash the centrifuge. So there's ways to do it, and the ways.
So in
I'm
other words, maybe they
describing
already did.
Yeah, it's possible.
Sabotage. Via
Yeah.
sabotage.
And the ways I'm describing are easily detectable, but they were supposed to, think of really clever ways that can't be detected by surveying in the usual ways the uranium hexafluoride. So it's possible, but again, it's frustrating that we don't know, and that Iran has this very dangerous remnant of its program, and that it's like a savings account. It's like money in the bank. The enrichment, the centrifuges made all this enriched uranium that it gives it great value, even if the centrifuges can no longer spin.
So is the worst case scenario that the missing HEU is indeed findable and intact and not sabotaged, that there are many, many hundreds of centrifuges and crates somewhere that we missed, and maybe another clandestine Natanz underground Fordell-like structure somewhere? What's the worst case scenario?
I think that's one of them. I mean, that they would cobble together an enrichment plant having some amount of 60% or 20%. And then over time, could take several months, get enough for weapon grade uranium for a couple bombs. They would then have to make the bomb. And so that's another challenge. And so it would probably take them a lot longer than what we projected prior to the war. Another is they take the 60% and directly fashion it into a nuclear weapon. I mean, it can be used.
Yeah.
The Iranian design was planning to use weapon grade uranium, and all the parts are configured for that core. But over time, they could just make everything bigger, test it. They could potentially make a gun type device. There's real challenges in making a gun type device, so it's not automatic, or that often it's not as easy as people think.
Yeah.
But it's a way forward, and they wouldn't have to enrich at all. And so those are, and that's what, that's where the immense destruction of the weaponization program has been important, is because, okay, maybe you can do that, but you're going to have an immense problem actually making the nuclear weapon itself, and doing all these steps without being detected. And so that's part of Israel's calculation of why they think it's 2 years with a hard effort undetected to get a bomb.
David Albright, that was a tour de force. Thank you so much for joining NatSec Matters.
Well, thank you.
That was David Albright. I'm Michael Allen. If you enjoy listening to NatSec Matters, please leave us a rating and review. We'd love to hear from you. If you're interested in becoming a sponsor, please email our team at bgs@bgsdc.com. You can also find this email in the show notes. Please join us next week for another episode of NatSec Matters.
NatSec Matters is produced by Steve Dorsey with assistance from Ashley Berry. NatSec Matters is a production of Beacon Global Strategies.